All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to this lunchtime edition of the DC Scrum user group. As always, we are here to connect, share, and learn about all things Agile and Scrum. My name is Fadi Stephan. I'm going to be your host for this afternoon. Few quick announcements before we get started. First off, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Excella and Kaizen Co. If anybody out here needs help with a training or coaching support, please reach out to me and we'll see how we can help you out. Next, on our regularly scheduled event is on Monday, December 14. We are going to have Anugopal present a coaching technique on self-care, self-reflection, and self-gratitude. So this is going to be on Monday at 5:30 p.m. If you can make it, please sign up and hope to see you again on Monday. For today, we are going to have a discussion on the 2020 Scrum Guide update. It's going to be 3 parts. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the Scrum Guide and the top 11 most important updates in the guide. Then we're going to have an opportunity to go into a breakout session to discuss the update that you think is most significant to you. Then we'll come back and have a debrief. All right, that's going to be our agenda for today. So let's get started. The top 11 changes in the Scrum Guide. Just to give you a bit of context, Scrum is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. Scrum was first presented in 1995. The guide didn't come till much later. In 2010 was the first time the Scrum Guide was published. And since then, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, the co-creators of Scrum, have updated the guide every 2 or 3 years or so based on community feedback, which brings us to today. Back on November 18, they released the 2020 Scrum Guide, and I'm going to share with you what I think are the top 11 changes in the guide. First off, a minimally sufficient framework, right? A minimally sufficient framework. Not particularly new. Scrum is a framework and it's not a definitive method, meaning it is simple, it is lightweight, and it's not overly prescriptive, right? This has been emphasized in the Scrum Guide by specifically calling out that Scrum is purposely incomplete. Many people forget this part and keep asking, well, what do I do in this situation? What do I do in this other situation? And you will not find the answers to those specific questions in the Scrum Guide. It is purposely high level. You can use the framework and you can use Scrum and empiricism to guide you by discovering what works for you in your context, in your environment, with your teams, within your organization. Inspect and adapt and apply what works for you while staying true to the Agile values and principles and the spirit of Scrum. All right. Next up. One Scrum team, all right? The previous Scrum Guides talked about a Scrum team that consists of a product owner, a Scrum Master, and a Scrum development team. This concept of having a Scrum development team within the overall Scrum team, this terminology was a bit awkward. And what ended up happening is people generally referred to the Scrum development team as the Scrum team, and then they ended up thinking of the Scrum Master and the product owner as being outside of the team. This created kind of an us versus them type of environment. And instead of a collaborative environment, the developers felt they were working for the product owner as opposed to collaborating with the product owner. So to address this, the new 2020 Scrum Guide talks about one Scrum team. The term development team has been replaced with developers, right? And developers in this context doesn't mean programmers or coders. It means anybody involved in the development of a product, no matter what your skill set is. So we have one Scrum team consisting of a product owner, a Scrum Master, and developers, all right? This ensures that we're all working together collaboratively. There are no hierarchies. And as a Scrum team as a whole, there are 3 accountabilities. The developers accountable for delivering a quality product increment, the product owner accountable for ensuring that the product increment is the most valuable thing that can be delivered, and the Scrum Master accountable for overall team effectiveness. Okay. So slight change in terminology, 1 Scrum team with 3 accountabilities. Next up, product definition. All right. Previous Scrum guides talked about Scrum being a framework to help create and manage complex products, but there was never a product definition included in the guide. So the 2020 Scrum Guide includes a product definition and defines it as a vehicle to delivering value. It has clear boundaries, known stakeholders, well-defined users or customers. A product can be a service, a physical product, or something more abstract. Don't have much more to add about this. Just thought it was interesting that they included a definition of a product in the 2020 update. Next up, we're going to talk about the product goal. All right, this is new. All right, many teams. Let me back up a bit. The previous Scrum guides talked about a vision and about teams needing to work towards a vision, but many teams fail to create an overall vision and fail to have product increments lead up to that vision. So to correct that, the concept of a product goal was introduced in the 2020 Scrum Guide. All right, now the product goal goes in the product backlog, and that's what we start with. We start with a product goal, and then the product backlog will emerge with product backlog items that will help fulfill that goal. All right, this ensures alignment. It ensures that everybody is working towards an overall objective, and each product increment gets us 1 step closer to that overall product goal or overall objective. All right, so new in the 2020 Scrum Guide, we start out with a product goal, and the product goal is in the product backlog. Next, we have a sprint goal. All right, so unlike the product goal, the sprint goal is not new. It was always there. However, many teams glossed over it. All right, in sprint planning, teams would not have 1 goal they are working towards for that sprint. They would gloss over it. And what ends up happening is team members would be working on siloed tasks, separate activities, not kind of related to each other. To fix this, the 2020 Scrum Guide elevates the Scrum goal. So like we have a product goal that goes in the product backlog, we have a sprint goal that goes in the sprint backlog, and it is tied to the product goal. Right? This ensures that as a team, we are working together collaboratively as opposed to siloed and working on separate activities. In addition, the sprint planning meeting has been modified slightly. Previously, the sprint goal was part of the what topic of sprint planning. Sprint planning was about the what and the how. And in the what part, we were supposed to discuss the sprint goal. Because it was being kind of glossed over, that has been moved up. And sprint planning is now 3 topics. We start out with the why, or the sprint goal. Why is this upcoming sprint important to our stakeholders and the overall product goal? Then we move on and talk about the topic 2, which is the what. All right, what in the product backlog is going to help us accomplish this sprint goal? Then we move on to topic 3 and talk about the how. How are we going to organize ourselves as a team to deliver on this sprint goal? And this follows nicely with the daily scrums. The daily scrums become about progress being made towards the sprint goal. All right, what progress are we making towards the sprint goal, not the individual tasks that are in our sprint backlog. Right, important clarification in the 2020 Scrum Guide. Give you an opportunity to kind of read through these. All right, next up, the definition of done. Right, like the sprint goal, this was always there. However, it was kind of glossed over as well. So in the 2020 Scrum Guide, this has been elevated, right? We have a product goal that goes in the product backlog. We have a sprint goal that goes in the sprint backlog. And we have a definition of done that goes in the product increment, right? And it basically says that the product increment that we deliver has to meet a level of quality as defined by our definition of done. Right? We are making a commitment to deliver a quality product increment as defined by our definition of done. The definition of done, by the way, is different than the acceptance criteria. The acceptance criteria is about the requirements. The definition of done is about the quality of our work. What level of quality does this product increment meet? Right? So something that was being glossed over previously has been elevated so that it gets a bit more focus as we move forward. Next up, the sprint review being decoupled from the product increment. Right? At the end of every sprint, a Scrum team delivers a product increment, and this product increment should be of high enough quality to be useful. Right? It's a working product, it can be delivered and can be used. Many teams struggle with this concept, end up reaching the end of the sprint without a working product increment. Right? So what they end up doing is working several sprints together and then being able to deliver a product increment. And that's, many reasons for that. It might be a lack of agile engineering practices, as well as a lack of proper product backlog refinement and breaking up their work into very, very thinly sliced vertical slices of small functionality. So to help with that, it's been emphasized that, yes, you do need to deliver a product increment at the end of every sprint, but you also can deliver the product increments throughout the sprint. And this encourages us to break down our work into smaller and smaller pieces of work so that we're not working on large items throughout the sprint, one large item, but many small items that we can deliver whenever they are ready, whenever they meet our definition of done. All right. This concept fits very nicely with the concept of continuous deployment and continuous delivery. So you don't have to wait till the end of the sprint to deliver your product increment. You can deliver them throughout the sprint. Up next, we are still going to stick with the sprint review. And we are going to talk about the sprint review as a working session. Right? The sprint review is a working session. The sprint review has always been about feedback. It's about getting feedback from stakeholders. However, many teams do the sprint review just as a demo, and it's a one-way presentation from the developers to the product owner with little to no stakeholder involvement. Right? There's little to no stakeholder involvement. And others treat the review as a kind of a gate process to releasing the product increment. So to clarify this misconception, the 2020 Scrum Guide specifically highlights that the sprint review is a working session where we're supposed to collaborate with the stakeholders, inspect what was delivered, and then update the product backlog based on what would be the next most valuable thing we can be working on. Right? It's not a presentation. It's not a one-way thing. It's a working session. We're collaborating and deciding what is the next most valuable thing we can be working on. And more importantly, it should not be considered a gate to releasing value. Right? It is not a gate to releasing value. Important clarification on the sprint review. All right, 3 more to go. Self-managing team. All right. Previous Scrum guides referred to the Scrum development team as self-organizing, meaning the team itself determines, right? The developers determine how to do the work and how to organize themselves, who's going to work on what, right? They determine the how and they determine the who, right? In the 2020 update, there's a focus on the overall Scrum team that includes the product owner, the developers, and the Scrum Master, right? Since we have this focus on the overall Scrum team, A better description of the Scrum team is self-managing, because it is not only determining how they're going to do the work and who's going to work on it, but also what they're going to work on. Because the product owner is part of the Scrum team, and the product owner determines what the team is going to work on. So a better description for the Scrum team would be that it's a self-managing team versus a self-organizing team. There was this slight change from self-organizing to self-managing. All right, next. We are going to talk about scaling. All right, we're going to talk about scaling. Previous guides talked about when you have multiple teams, all of the teams are working off of one product backlog. However, in practice, most organizations, when they scale, they end up creating multiple teams with multiple backlogs and multiple product owners. All right, this creates a lack of alignment because there isn't a focus on the overall objective. All right, it creates kind of local optimization. There's finger pointing between the different product owners as they kind of try to optimize their own product backlogs. There's confusion, lack of ownership, and things are muddied. So to address that, the 2020 update to the Scrum Guide goes a step further and says, not only are we all working off of the same product backlog, but we have the same product owner and we have the same one product goal. All right, so this is helping us better understand how scaling should work when we're using Scrum. All right, one product backlog, one product owner, one product goal for all the Scrum teams working on that one product. Finally, a Scrum Master is a true leader, right? All the updates I've given so far have been clarifications about kind of confusions, misunderstandings, and anti-patterns that have been applied in Scrum. This one is kind of in the same spirit. However, I'm not so kind of keen about the term true leader, all right? Previous guides referred to the Scrum Master as a servant leader. Servant leadership was coined kind of in the 70s. And there's been a lot of literature, a lot of research, a lot of publications around the concept of servant leadership. Many organizations still quite don't understand what that is and end up having Scrum Masters be the team's admin or just a facilitator or a note taker without any leadership activities or experience. So the Scrum Master is a change agent. The Scrum Master is leading Scrum adoption within organizations. The Scrum Master is educating stakeholders about empiricism. The Scrum Master is removing impediments. The Scrum Master is ensuring that the team is delivering the most valuable thing and at the highest quality that they can. And the Scrum Master is accountable for continuous improvement. Right? These all require leadership. And to address that, the term servant leader was dropped and replaced by a true leader. So the 2020 Scrum Guide says that the Scrum Master is a true leader that serves the Scrum team and the organization. And the Scrum Master is accountable for the overall effectiveness of the team. Hopefully, this might change how organizations are viewing the role of the Scrum Master. I'm not so sure the terminology is the best terminology used, but that has been kind of dropped to emphasize that the Scrum Master is a leader. And that is it for these updates. All right, there are a bunch of other things in the guide, but I believe these are the top 11 updates that are most important. If you've been doing Scrum, if you've been successful with Scrum, these updates are going to seem insignificant because you've probably been already doing a lot of these things. If you've been struggling with Scrum, hopefully these updates will clarify some confusion or anti-patterns you might be applying and help kind of guide you to correct them so that you can get the most benefits from Scrum. All right, let's talk about how the next session is going to go. I am going to share with you a board here. Let me see how we're going to do this. All right, when you get this link, down here you have Scrum guides. And here are the 11 topics we highlighted. If anybody has any other topics that think are important that I did not mention, feel free to jump in. All right, anybody, unmute and add that if you feel there are any other topics that I did not mention.
Hey, Fadi, I think also there was they removed the mention of the 3 questions asked in stand-up.
Yes, so I kind of include that in number 1 as part of Scrum being a minimally sufficient framework or purposely incomplete. Any prescriptions, anything that was prescriptive was removed from Scrum, and Scrum has shrunk from 18 pages down to 13 pages because anything detailed, anything that was specifically kind of overly prescriptive was removed. And like you have mentioned, the 3 questions and the daily Scrum kind of have been dropped as well. Good point there, yeah. All right, folks, here's how this is going to work. We have these topics here. There's 11 topics, and there's going to be breakout rooms. So any one of these that you'd like to chat a bit more with your fellow teammates at the DC Scrum user group, you can jump into those breakout rooms. This is going to be a general Q&A session. There's also a job board. So we usually kind of put announcements. So if anybody's hiring or anybody's available for work, you can add your name right here so that we can kind of connect you. The link to the guide is available over here. When you go into the breakout rooms, if let's say you want to talk about the definition of done, you can click here on definition of done, and that will take you to this session where you can add notes and talk a bit more about these updates that we've covered. Right, so I'm going to give you a link to this board. We're going to do a 10-minute breakout session so you can talk about it. The link is in the chat right now. You should be able to log in anonymously, no need for an ID. I'm going to also open the breakout room, so I'll give you the opportunity to join whatever breakout room you want to kind of do a deeper dive discussion on. And if you just want to stay here and talk about general Q&A, you're free to stay here as well. The breakout rooms are set up so that you can move into the breakout room that you want, right? You can just click on the breakout room button in Zoom and move into whatever session you prefer to talk more about with your fellow participants. What we're going to do is a 10-minute kind of breakout session. Then we're going to come back and kind of debrief a bit about what conversations you had. Thank you, Jim. So we are at 1:02. I am going to keep the line open. So for whoever wants to keep this having a Q&A and the open discussion, we will. For everybody else, I want to thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again on Monday. It's going to be our last event for the year. Otherwise, happy holidays, and we will see you next year. All right. Whoever wants to join, please stick around.
Thanks, Fadi.
This line open.